All right, so the 49ers, a day off from practice today. They travel to Las Vegas to face the Raiders in joint practice on Thursday. And then, of course, the teams will play a preseason game on Saturday. But as was the case last week when the Broncos came to town, probably the big coaching day for the 49ers and the Raiders would be Thursday for the joint practice. That's when the top guys will be up against the other top guys, and it'll be, obviously a controlled setting, no tackling to the ground, but that's when, they'll go up against each other 20, 30, 40 snaps. And for the preseason game, I don't know what the 49ers plan is, what Kyle Shanahan expects to do in the game Saturday, which will be televised, of course. But, as far as the top guys, again, I would say that the 49ers veterans, their star players, either won't play or the guys who do will play sparingly. So the big practice session, the big time where, for evaluations, really takes place on the practice field. And so last week when the Broncos came to town, I watched the 49ers offense primarily going against the Broncos defense. And Jennifer, my colleague at NBCSportsBayArea.com, she watched the 49ers defense go against the Broncos offense. So we're going to flip it on Thursday, and maybe I'll get an opportunity to see both sides. And I like to kind of, while watching one practice field, kind of look over at the other. I'm not sure exactly how the Raiders situations can be set up as far as the sidelines, but I will tell you what is notable and what to be watching for. And let's just start off with the Raiders offense against the 49ers defense. And that's the side that I'll be watching. To me, a lot of it is the interior 49ers defensive line going up against the Raiders offensive line. Now, there's a marquee matchup, is Nick Bosa against Colton Miller. And I think Colton Miller's probably going to have his hands full, but a guy who's considered a top left tackle in the league, certainly paid like it. The way Bosa has been looking in training camp, I can assure you Colton Miller will have his hands full against Nick Bosa. So the one-on-ones will be fun to watch there. And then just what the 49ers do, when they flip it, Bryce Huff needs to get in some work. Michael Williams won't practice. The rookie still has the knee issue. He'll be out for probably another week. But to me, it's kind of the inside guys. It's Alfred Collins, who isn't there yet. Probably not even close to being there yet. CJ West, who I think is ahead of in that category as well. The undrafted rookie from Washington really showing some good things and has a solid opportunity to win a spot on the 53-man roster and a good practice Thursday, probably even more so than a good showing on Saturday, could catapult him into that area. Because now the 49ers are in a situation where, because they've not only practiced against the Broncos, but they've played against the Broncos. On Thursday, they will practice against the Raiders, and then they will play against the Raiders. Those are two teams right there that should have, by the end of this weekend, a really firm grasp on the 49ers roster. I guess, the same can obviously be said about the 49ers having a grasp on the Broncos roster and the Raiders roster. So if a guy like Sebastian Valdez, if a guy like running back Corey Kiner pops, and these teams have an opportunity and an opening for one of those players, and the 49ers opt not to keep them on the 53-man roster, then those teams kind of have an inside track to claiming one of those players because they know them very well, having seen them go up against their players. So what's interesting for the Raiders is that, I look at their roster and their draft. In the draft, we all know the 49ers did not take an offensive lineman until the 7th round, and I'll talk a little bit more about that player, Connor Colby. But with the 98th and 99th overall picks, the Raiders selected offensive linemen back-to-back. They went with someone who's lining up at left guard right now, Caleb Rogers, at 98. And then they went at a left tackle, backup left tackle, Charles Grant at 99. I think the 49ers were going to grab one of those players, if not, and I don't know which one, or maybe both of them, either one, had they been there at number 11. It might have actually worked to the 49ers' advantage that the Raiders did take offensive linemen at 98 and 99, because the 49ers took Upton Stout at number 100, and it turns out he might be, at least in this first training camp, he might be the best rookie the 49ers have on the field. Now, he's missed a couple practices with the calf injury. He did not suit up for the game on Saturday against the Broncos. 49ers are hoping he can get back out there on Thursday practicing against the Raiders. And by the way, the Raiders, we're talking about the 49ers wide receiving difficulties. Raiders really don't have much there at the wide receiver position. They drafted a wide receiver in the second round, Jack Betts. They also have Jacoby Myers, who's in the final year of his 3-year, $33 million contract. He's seen as kind of the comp for Juwan Jennings. And that was a contract that Jacoby Myers signed 2 years ago. He's in for anything the 49ers could do with Juwan Jennings. From Jennings' standpoint, would be well more than $11 million a year. That's what Jacoby Myers has. But the other receivers on the Raiders, Dante Thornton, Trey Tucker, Colin Johnson, Andy Bachman. And if you know any of those guys, then hats off to you. So those are the receivers that such guys like Dallas Flowers will be up against, Darrell Luter, as they jockey for positions on the 53-man roster, Trey Brown as well. One interesting thing, talking about the those defensive tackles for the 49ers, there's competition for the Raiders. Right guard Jackson Powers Johnson he returned to practice from a ribs injury for the Raiders, and Alex Kappa, the former Humboldt State star. Humboldt State now doesn't have a program, and Humboldt State isn't even Humboldt State anymore. It's Cal Poly Humboldt. But anyway, Alex Kappa was drafted by the Buccaneers, won a Super Bowl there, went to the Bengals, and now he's with the Raiders, and he's been injured. So he really hasn't entered that competition. But that's who, the interior of the offensive line for the Raiders that we matched up against those young guys for the 49ers. Something to keep an eye on, Ashton Genty catching passes out of the backfield. Raheem Mostert for the Raiders catching passes out of the backfield. Seeing those guys go up against Steve Winters and Nick Martin will be something to keep an eye on. Let's see if Nick Martin has improved, cleaned up some of the stuff that haunted him on Saturday against the Broncos. And Marquise Siegel running with the ones, and probably see a lot of action with the ones on Thursday. Seeing him go up against Brock Bowers is something that should be interesting as well, as it seems like, reading everything out of Las Vegas, Brock Bowers and Geno Smith have a thing going on there. Of course, Brock Bowers, first team All-Pro as a rookie, a pass-catching machine. So that's some of the elements I'll be watching on that side of the ball. One of the things that stood out when the Raiders and the 49ers practiced against each other a couple of years ago in 2023 was watching Max Crosby go up against Trent Williams. And those guys really had a nice competition going. In fact, one of the things that Crosby said in going up against Trent Williams, and those guys talked a lot too during the practice, like talking, not trash talking, just talking, like comparing notes and everything else. Crosby said, me and Trent had some great reps getting after it. We were chopping it up after as well. He's the best in the game, so we had a couple of one-on-ones and a couple of team reps against each other. That's what it's all about. I want to go against the best. So you can be sure during the practice on Thursday, Max Crosby will be lining up against the best, Trent Williams. That was 2 years ago when he said that, and it all still applies now. So I'm sure Colton McKivitz will want some reps against Max Crosby. I'm sure he'll get them. On the other side is Malcolm Kuntz for the Raiders, and he had a really good season in 2023 with 8 sacks. However, he missed all of last season with an ACL injury, so he's coming back into form as well. 49ers interior of their offensive line. We'll see what's happening there. It wasn't a great sign that Ben Barch left the practice field on Tuesday, But what was interesting was that it was Connor Colby, the 7th-round pick from Iowa, who replaced him at left guard. And so Connor Colby, I'll be honest here, during the one-on-ones early in training camp, was not impressed. In fact, I haven't had him on my 53-man roster up to this point, but he has steadily improved, not only the one-on-ones, but in the game. Now, granted, against the Broncos, he was going up against, guys lower on the depth chart, but he played very well and showed a lot of promise there. And so when Barch left the lineup on Tuesday with some sort of undisclosed injury, it was Connor Colby who stepped in. So Connor Colby, my eyes will be on him as well as much as I can, because he'll be going up against Jonah Laolu, 17-game player last year, 7 starts, and also Adam Butler, 16 games last year for the Raiders, no starts, but those are the defensive tackles for the Raiders. And so Connor Colby, kind of a nice entree into the competition, because during the course of the season, 49ers will certainly be going up against more high-profile defensive tackles. But in a practice setting, as Connor Colby continues to show progress, probably a very good time for him to get those reps against those Raiders defensive tackles. Raiders have added Devin White, linebacker, so he's been good in pass coverage. See him going up against Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey, I don't expect him to play at all during the preseason, but in the practice on Thursday, a lot of reps for McCaffrey. McCaffrey and Kittle certainly shined on the 49ers practice field on Thursday. Also, one other thing to keep an eye on, which is Jamal Adams. He's been a all-pro, Pro Bowl safety in the NFL. He has now been switched to will linebacker. When Pete Carroll brought him in, he said, "You're a linebacker," and that's the way it's gone. 2 years ago, George Kittle did not practice against the Raiders. He had an adductor strain, so he set that out. But that'll be good to watch. Jamal Adams against George Kittle. George Kittle, like I mentioned, man, really looking good on the practice field. So those are some of the things. Of course, Brock Purdy is playing very well. Mac Jones looks good as the backup quarterback, and it takes me back to 2023, I guess it was. Yeah, when the 49ers and the Raiders practiced, it was Trey Lance then, or I guess 2022. I'm sorry, 2022 when they practiced. Trey Lance was the quarterback. He was the starter. He had a good practice, as I recall, and up and down, I guess, a little bit. But toward the end, they had to move the drill, move the chains, move the ball period. And Lance, the last pass of the day was a really well-thrown ball in a 2-minute drill. Hit Cameron Latu. Remember him? 49ers drafted him as a tight end to be, a guy who would be George Kittle's backup eventually. That never panned out, and we certainly got a sense of that when Latu just dropped a pass in the end zone. So those are the kinds of things that stand out at that point. Well, you know what? No, that was 2023. Yeah, that was 2023 because Lance was Lance was competing with Darnold to be the backup. Brock was already the starting quarterback, but Lance had a good practice that day, hit Latu on a pass that he dropped. But obviously Sam Darnold had the better training camp and pretty much what was the obvious backup at that point. 49ers trade Trey Lance to the Cowboys. And now, of course, Trey Lance is with the Chargers and making a good run to be Justin Herbert's backup. So anyway, sorry for all the confusion there on the years. It was 23, not last year. The 49ers did not practice last year against the Saints because of all the injuries. And you know what? Injuries are piling up around the league. The Chargers canceled their joint practices this week because of their injury situation. So even though the 49ers do have a lot of guys who might not be on the field, they do have enough guys to do this joint practice with the Raiders at their practice facility in Henderson, Nevada. So that's the rundown of what I'll be looking for during the practice. Thanks so much for watching. And that is it for now.